Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance of the Grand Ballroom at the Marriott downtown, her heart beating faster than she'd expected. 20 years had passed since she last walked through the doors of Northwestern University's alumni gathering, and the familiar mix of nervous energy and excitement reminded her why she'd avoided these events for so long. The girl who had once sat in the back of lecture halls, working 3 part-time jobs to afford textbooks, felt like a distant memory now, yet somehow still lived within her as she smoothed down her simple black dress and took a deep breath. Hi there, beautiful souls. I'm Tina, and I'm so grateful you've joined me today for another story that I believe will touch your heart in the most unexpected ways. Today, I want to share with you Sarah's incredible journey from struggling college student to successful entrepreneur, and the moment at her college reunion that changed everything she thought she knew about success, self-worth, and the power of staying true to your values even when others can't see your worth. This isn't just a story about business success. It's about the courage to build something meaningful from the ground up, and how sometimes the people who doubt us the most become our greatest teachers about what truly matters in life. If you've ever felt underestimated or wondered if your hard work would ever pay off, please stay with me until the very end, because Sarah's story will show you that authenticity and persistence have a way of creating the most beautiful victories. If this resonates with you, I'd love for you to join our family here by hitting that subscribe button and sharing your own thoughts in the comments below. Sarah had built her consulting firm, Martinez Strategic Solutions, from absolutely nothing, starting in her 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand laptop and an unwavering belief that small businesses deserved the same level of strategic guidance that large corporations received from expensive consulting firms. The journey hadn't been easy, and there had been countless nights when she wondered if she was foolish to think she could compete with established firms that had decades of experience and prestigious client lists. But something deep inside her had always known that her approach was different, more personal, more focused on genuine solutions rather than impressive presentations and corporate buzzwords that often left small business owners feeling more confused than helped. The invitation to the reunion had arrived 6 months earlier, and Sarah had initially planned to ignore it completely, just as she had done for the previous 4 reunion cycles. The thought of facing classmates who had taken traditional corporate paths, climbing ladders at Fortune 500 companies, and collecting impressive titles filled her with a familiar anxiety that she'd worked hard to overcome through years of therapy and personal development. She had learned to measure success by her own standards rather than society's expectations. But the prospect of explaining her unconventional career path to people who might not understand her choices still felt overwhelming and emotionally draining. But this year felt different somehow, and Dr. Patricia Williams, her former business ethics professor who had become a mentor and friend, had specifically encouraged her to attend, suggesting that reconnecting with her academic roots might provide valuable perspective on how far she had traveled, both personally and professionally. Dr. Williams had been one of the few professors who had recognized Sarah's potential during college, even when Sarah herself couldn't see beyond the financial struggles and academic challenges that seemed to define her university experience. As Sarah moved through the elegantly decorated ballroom, she recognized faces that had aged and changed, just as her own had. But the underlying personalities and social dynamics seemed remarkably unchanged from their college days. The same groups that had formed during freshman orientation appeared to have reconvened, with successful lawyers clustering near the bar, medical professionals gathered around the silent auction tables, and the technology entrepreneurs holding court near the registration table with stories of IPOs and venture capital funding that drew impressed crowds of listeners. Sarah found herself gravitating toward the quieter corners of the room, observing the interactions, and remembering why she had often felt like an outsider during her college years, not because she wasn't intelligent or capable, but because her priorities and circumstances had been so different from many of her classmates who had the luxury of focusing solely on their studies without the constant pressure of earning money to survive. She had worked at the campus bookstore, tutored struggling students in mathematics, and spent weekends catering events to pay for textbooks and living expenses that her partial scholarship couldn't cover. The weight of those memories wasn't entirely negative, though, because those experiences had taught her resilience, empathy, and a work ethic that had served her well in building her business from the ground up. Every client she had helped, every small business owner whose revenue had increased through her strategic guidance, every family business that had successfully navigated a difficult transition. These successes felt more meaningful to her than any corporate title or salary increase could have provided. When she finally approached the registration table to check in and receive her name tag, Sarah noticed that the volunteer behind the table was Jennifer Chen, who had been her study partner in several economics courses and had always been kind and inclusive even when other students had been less welcoming. Jennifer's face lit up with genuine recognition and warmth as she handed Sarah her name tag, which simply read, Sarah Martinez, Martinez Strategic Solutions, without any elaborate titles or corporate affiliations. The conversation with Jennifer flowed naturally as they caught up on the major life events that had shaped their paths since graduation. And Sarah felt some of her initial anxiety beginning to fade as she remembered that not everyone from her college years had been judgmental or competitive. Jennifer had become a high school mathematics teacher and spoke passionately about her students and the satisfaction she found in helping young people discover their potential in subjects they had previously found intimidating or impossible to understand. As they talked, Sarah became aware of a familiar voice carrying across the room with the same confident tone that had dominated many classroom discussions during their senior year. Marcus Thompson had been the type of student who always sat in the front row, always had his hand raised first, and always seemed to have connections and opportunities that others could only dream about accessing. His father owned a successful construction company, and Marcus had often spoken about his plans to revolutionize the industry through innovative business practices and strategic partnerships that would expand the family business into new markets and territories. Sarah hadn't thought about Marcus in years, but hearing his voice brought back memories of classroom interactions where he had frequently dismissed ideas that came from students who didn't share his background or perspective, particularly when those ideas challenged conventional business wisdom or suggested that success could be measured by factors other than profit margins and market dominance. He had been particularly critical of Sarah's final project in their senior business strategy course, where she had proposed a consulting model focused on small businesses and community development rather than corporate growth and competitive advantage. Jennifer noticed Sarah's distraction and followed her gaze toward the group where Marcus was holding court, sharing what appeared to be a very animated story that was drawing laughter and impressed reactions from his audience of former classmates. Marcus Thompson, Jennifer said with a slight eye roll. Some things never change. He's been talking about his company's latest acquisition for the past 20 minutes. Apparently, they just bought out 3 smaller firms, and he's now the vice president of strategic development, or something equally impressive sounding. The information hit Sarah with unexpected force, not because she felt competitive or jealous, but because she realized that Marcus was now working for Thompson Construction and Development, the very company that had become one of her firm's most important clients over the past 18 months. The irony was almost overwhelming. While Marcus had been climbing the corporate ladder within his family's expanding business empire, Sarah had been quietly working behind the scenes to help develop the strategic frameworks and operational improvements that had contributed to the company's recent success and growth trajectory. Her consulting relationship with Thompson Construction had begun when Marcus's uncle, David Thompson, had reached out through a referral from another client who had experienced significant improvements in efficiency and profitability after implementing Sarah's recommendations. David had been struggling to modernize the company's operations while maintaining the family values and community focus that had been the foundation of their success for over 30 years, and he had been frustrated by previous consulting experiences with large firms that had provided generic solutions rather than understanding the unique challenges and opportunities that family businesses faced. Sarah's approach had been completely different from what David had experienced with other consultants, focusing on understanding the company's culture and values before proposing any strategic changes, and developing solutions that enhanced rather than replaced the personal relationships and community connections that had always been Thompson Construction's greatest strengths. The 6-month engagement had been so successful that David had asked her to stay on as a strategic advisor, helping to guide the company's expansion plans while ensuring that growth didn't compromise the principles and practices that had earned them their reputation for quality and integrity. The consulting work had been some of the most fulfilling of Sarah's career, not only because of the significant impact her recommendations had on the company's performance, but because David Thompson reminded her of her own grandfather, who had run a small carpentry business with the same attention to detail and commitment to treating employees and customers like family. Working with Thompson Construction had reinforced her belief that business success didn't have to come at the expense of human values, and that the most sustainable growth often came from companies that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term profits. But David had never mentioned that his nephew Marcus worked for the company, and Sarah had never thought to ask about family members who might be involved in the business operations. Her contract was with David directly, and most of her strategic work was conducted at the executive level with senior management who had been with the company for decades and shared David's vision for responsible growth and community engagement. She had occasionally heard references to younger family members who were being groomed for leadership roles, but those individuals had never been part of her direct interactions or project implementations. Now, standing in this reunion ballroom and listening to Marcus describe his role in the company's recent acquisitions, Sarah found herself in the surreal position of being the anonymous consultant whose strategic recommendations had likely contributed to the very successes that Marcus was now claiming credit for in front of their former classmates. The situation felt like something out of a novel, and Sarah wasn't sure whether to find it amusing or concerning that Marcus appeared to be completely unaware of her involvement in his company's strategic planning and operational improvements. My beautiful friends, I want to pause here for just a moment because I can feel how many of you are connecting with Sarah's situation. If you've ever felt invisible or undervalued, if you've ever worked hard behind the scenes while others took credit, or if you've ever wondered whether staying true to your values was worth it when others seem to be getting ahead through different means, please know that you're not alone and your story matters. If Sarah's journey is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, I'd love for you to become part of our community here by subscribing and sharing your own experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply witness each other's stories and remind one another that authentic success takes many forms and that doing meaningful work often happens quietly, away from the spotlight, but it matters just as much as any public recognition or corporate title. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself drawn into various conversations with classmates who were genuinely interested in learning about her business and the work she did with small and medium-sized companies. She discovered that many of her former classmates had encountered challenges in their corporate careers that had made them more appreciative of alternative approaches to success and professional fulfillment. Several people expressed envy for her independence and the direct impact she was able to have on her clients' lives and businesses, admitting that their own corporate positions often felt removed from meaningful outcomes and genuine human connection. Dr. Patricia Williams appeared at Sarah's side during one of these conversations, her presence immediately bringing a sense of comfort and validation that reminded Sarah why she had always felt safe in her former professor's classroom. Dr. Williams had been following Sarah's career with pride and interest, occasionally sharing updates about her business successes with other faculty members who remembered Sarah as a dedicated student with unusual insight into the human elements of business strategy and organizational development. Sarah has become exactly the kind of ethical business leader we hope to inspire through our program, Dr. Williams told the small group that had gathered around them. Her approach to consulting focuses on sustainable growth and community impact rather than just profit maximization, and she's proven that you can build a successful business while maintaining your values and making a positive difference in people's lives. The praise from her former mentor meant more to Sarah than any corporate recognition or industry award could have provided, because Dr. Williams understood the foundation of knowledge and principles that guided Sarah's work, and could appreciate how far she had traveled from the uncertain student who had once worried about whether she belonged in business school at all. The validation helped Sarah remember that her path, while unconventional, had been guided by clear values and genuine desire to help others succeed rather than simply accumulate wealth or status. But the peaceful moment was interrupted when Marcus Thompson's voice rose above the general conversation noise, clearly addressing someone in a tone that carried across the room with unmistakable condescension and amusement. "Sarah Martinez? Oh my God, I remember her. She's the one who wanted to save the world through consulting or something equally naive. I wonder what kind of job she ended up with. Probably something in non-profit work, or maybe teaching, right? I remember her final project was all about helping small businesses instead of focusing on real corporate strategy." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, not because she cared about Marcus's opinion, but because his dismissive tone and assumptions revealed exactly the kind of narrow thinking that she had encountered throughout her career from people who equated success with corporate titles and salary levels rather than impact and fulfillment. The fact that he was making these comments while working for a company that had benefited significantly from her strategic guidance added a layer of irony that was almost too overwhelming to process. Jennifer, who had overheard the comment, looked at Sarah with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "He has no idea what he's talking about," she whispered. "Some people never grow up or learn to see beyond their own limited perspective." But Sarah felt something shift inside her as she listened to Marcus continue his commentary about classmates who had chosen alternative career paths, his voice carrying the same arrogance and dismissiveness that had characterized his classroom contributions 20 years earlier. She realized that this moment represented an opportunity not for revenge or confrontation, but for education, and perhaps even bridge building between different approaches to success and professional fulfillment. Dr. Williams had been listening to the conversation as well, and she caught Sarah's eye with an expression that seemed to say, "This is your moment to choose who you want to be." Sarah had learned from her mentor that true leadership often meant taking the high road even when others chose differently, and that the most powerful responses to criticism were often demonstrations of character and competence rather than defensive arguments or attempts at public vindication. Sarah took a deep breath and made her way across the room toward Marcus's group, not with any intention of creating conflict or embarrassment, but with the genuine hope that a direct conversation might bridge the gap between their different perspectives and perhaps even lead to better understanding of how diverse approaches to business could complement rather than compete with each other. She had learned through years of consulting work that most conflicts arose from misunderstandings and limited perspectives rather than fundamental incompatibilities. Marcus noticed her approach, and his expression shifted to one of surprise, mixed with the kind of awkward recognition that often characterizes reunion encounters between classmates who had never been particularly close. "Sarah Martinez, I was just talking about you. How have you been? What kind of work are you doing these days?" The question carried an undertone of assumption that suggested he expected her to confirm his earlier predictions about her career trajectory. And Sarah could sense that the small group around them had picked up on the tension and was watching the interaction with the kind of fascination that reunion confrontations often generated among observers who remembered the personalities and dynamics from their shared college experience. "I run a strategic consulting firm," Sarah replied simply, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline she could feel coursing through her system. "We work primarily with small and medium-sized businesses, helping them develop sustainable growth strategies and improve their operational efficiency." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, as if he were recalibrating his assumptions, but still not quite ready to abandon his preconceived notions about what constituted legitimate business success. "That's interesting. I imagine that must be challenging work, trying to help companies that probably don't have much budget for real strategic consulting." "We've been expanding our own business quite aggressively lately, acquiring smaller firms and really scaling up our operations in ways that require serious strategic thinking and market analysis." The irony of his comment was so profound that Sarah had to pause for a moment to process the full implications of what he was saying. He was essentially describing the very growth strategy that she had helped develop and implement through her consulting work with his uncle, completely unaware that the serious strategic thinking he was crediting himself with had actually originated from the woman he had just dismissed as probably working in nonprofit or education. That's wonderful that your company has been growing so successfully, Sarah responded, genuinely meaning the compliment despite the surreal nature of the conversation. Strategic acquisitions can be an excellent way to expand market presence while bringing new capabilities and talent into an organization. What industry are you in? Marcus straightened with visible pride, clearly pleased to have an opportunity to share details about his professional accomplishments with someone he assumed would be impressed by his corporate success. Thompson Construction and Development. It's actually my family's company, but I've been instrumental in developing our new growth strategy and leading the acquisition process that's helped us become one of the largest construction firms in the region. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the full scope of the situation became clear. Not only was Marcus working for her client company, but he was apparently taking credit for strategic initiatives that had originated from her consulting recommendations and been implemented through months of collaborative work with his uncle and the senior management team. The situation was beyond ironic. It was almost surreal in its complete role reversal from his dismissive assumptions about her career trajectory. Thompson Construction, Sarah repeated, keeping her voice neutral while her mind raced through the implications of this revelation. That's an impressive company with a wonderful reputation in the community. I imagine the strategic planning for that kind of expansion requires careful attention to maintaining company culture and values while scaling operations. Exactly, Marcus replied enthusiastically, apparently interpreting her knowledge of strategic planning challenges as admiration for his business acumen rather than professional expertise. Most people don't understand how complex it is to grow a family business without losing the personal touch that made it successful in the first place. We brought in some outside consulting help initially, but ultimately the real strategic vision had to come from within the company, from people who really understood the industry and the family dynamics. The comment about outside consulting help being ultimately insufficient compared to internal strategic vision struck Sarah as particularly ironic, since her consulting approach had always emphasized collaboration with internal teams and building on existing company strengths rather than imposing external solutions. The success of her work with Thompson Construction had come precisely from her ability to understand and enhance the family dynamics and company culture that Marcus was now claiming credit for preserving. Jennifer, who had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, caught Sarah's eye and raised her eyebrows in a way that clearly communicated her recognition of the incredible irony playing out in front of them. Dr. Williams had also moved closer to the group, her expression suggesting that she was beginning to piece together the situation and understand why Sarah seemed so composed despite Marcus's continued condescension. "It sounds like you found an excellent consulting partner," Sarah said carefully. "The best consulting relationships are indeed collaborative, with outside perspectives enhancing rather than replacing internal knowledge and expertise." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, apparently pleased that Sarah seemed to understand the importance of internal leadership in strategic planning. "The consultant we worked with was fine for the initial analysis, but the real breakthrough came when I started leading the strategic implementation myself. My Uncle David was initially hesitant about some of the more aggressive growth strategies, but I was able to convince him that we needed to think bigger and move faster if we wanted to compete with the major players in our industry." Sarah had to work hard to maintain her neutral expression as Marcus described strategic initiatives that she had spent months developing through careful analysis of market conditions, competitive positioning, and the company's operational capabilities. The aggressive growth strategies he was claiming credit for had actually been carefully balanced recommendations that took into account David Thompson's concerns about maintaining company values while expanding operations, and the implementation had been successful precisely because it had honored rather than dismissed the founder's wisdom and experience. Dr. Williams stepped closer to the group, her academic instincts clearly engaged by the fascinating dynamics of this conversation. "Sarah, didn't you mention that your consulting work has included some significant projects with construction and development companies? It sounds like you and Marcus might have some interesting professional experiences to compare." The question was posed with the kind of innocence that only someone with Dr. Williams's years of experience managing classroom discussions could achieve, creating an opening for deeper conversation while maintaining plausible deniability about any agenda or intention to create confrontation. Sarah recognized her former professor's technique and appreciated the graceful way she was being offered an opportunity to respond to Marcus's claims without having to initiate the revelation herself. "Yes, construction and development has been one of my firm's most successful practice areas," Sarah replied. "We've had the privilege of working with several family-owned companies that were navigating the challenges of growth while maintaining their founding values and community connections. It's some of the most rewarding work we do because the impact is so visible and meaningful." Marcus nodded approvingly, apparently pleased to discover what he interpreted as common ground with someone whose career he had previously dismissed. "It really is satisfying work. There's something special about being part of building something substantial that will have lasting impact on communities and families. Not everyone gets to be involved in that kind of meaningful business development." The comment struck Sarah as particularly ironic, given his earlier dismissal of her career choices as naive, and his assumption that she had probably ended up in nonprofit work or education, as if those fields were somehow less meaningful or impactful than corporate business development. But rather than feeling angry or defensive, Sarah found herself genuinely curious about whether this conversation might lead to greater understanding between them about different approaches to creating business value and professional fulfillment. "Have you found that maintaining company culture becomes more challenging as organizations grow larger?" Sarah asked, genuinely interested in his perspective, even though she suspected his understanding of these issues might be more limited than he realized. Marcus considered the question with the kind of serious expression that suggested he was pleased to be discussing what he clearly viewed as sophisticated business strategy with someone who seemed to appreciate the complexity of his work. "It's definitely one of the biggest challenges we face. My Uncle David is very focused on preserving what he calls the family feeling of our company. But I've had to help him understand that some changes are inevitable when you're scaling operations and bringing new people into the organization." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, remembering the many conversations she had had with David Thompson about exactly this issue, and how they had worked together to develop solutions that honored his commitment to treating employees like family while creating systems that could support a larger workforce. The strategic framework they had developed had been built around the principle that company culture wasn't something to be preserved unchanged, but rather something to be intentionally cultivated and evolved as the organization grew. "That's such an important balance to strike," Sarah agreed. "Some of the most successful growing companies I've worked with have found ways to scale their values and culture rather than simply trying to maintain them unchanged. It requires thoughtful planning and usually some creative approaches to communication and leadership development." "Exactly," Marcus replied enthusiastically. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I've been bringing to our strategic planning. We've implemented new communication systems and leadership training programs that help maintain our family culture even as we bring in new employees and expand into new markets." Sarah recognized every element he was describing as part of the strategic recommendations she had developed during her consulting engagement. But she was beginning to understand that Marcus genuinely believed he had originated these ideas himself. The situation was less about deliberate deception and more about the ways that collaborative strategic development could become internalized by team members who had participated in implementation without necessarily retaining clear awareness of where specific ideas had originated. Dr. Williams had been listening to the conversation with the kind of fascination that complex human dynamics always inspired in her academic mind. And Sarah could see that her former professor was beginning to piece together the full scope of what was happening. "Marcus, it sounds like your company has been fortunate to have access to really sophisticated strategic thinking. Have you found that outside consulting perspectives helped shape your approach? Or did most of the strategic innovation come from within your team?" The question was beautifully crafted to create an opening for truth without forcing confrontation, and Sarah appreciated her mentor's continued ability to facilitate difficult conversations with grace and wisdom. Marcus's response would reveal whether he was aware of the consulting work's contribution to his company's success, or whether he had genuinely forgotten or minimized its importance in his own understanding of recent developments. "We did work with a consultant initially," Marcus acknowledged, his tone suggesting that he viewed this as a minor detail in the larger story of his strategic leadership. But honestly, the real breakthrough came when I started taking a more active role in strategic planning. The consultant provided some useful background analysis, but the innovative thinking that really transformed our approach came from understanding the business from the inside and being willing to challenge conventional wisdom about how family businesses should operate. Sarah felt a moment of genuine sadness at his response, not because she needed credit or recognition, but because his inability to acknowledge collaborative contributions reflected a mindset that would ultimately limit his effectiveness as a leader and strategist. The most successful business leaders she had worked with over the years had been those who understood that great results came from bringing together diverse perspectives and expertise rather than trying to be the sole source of innovation and insight. Jennifer had been following the conversation with growing amazement, and Sarah could see that her former study partner was struggling to contain her reaction to the increasingly surreal nature of Marcus's claims. Dr. Williams caught Jennifer's eye and gave her a slight shake of the head that clearly communicated the importance of allowing the conversation to unfold naturally rather than creating premature confrontation or embarrassment. "It sounds like you've been able to make a real difference in your family's business," Sarah said sincerely. "Growth strategies are only as good as their implementation, and it takes real leadership skill to help an organization embrace change while maintaining its core identity." Marcus beamed at what he interpreted as acknowledgement of his business acumen, apparently pleased that someone who worked in consulting could appreciate the complexity and sophistication of his strategic thinking. "Thank you. It's been challenging, but incredibly rewarding work. I think the key has been understanding that you can't just apply generic business school theories to family companies. You need to really understand the unique dynamics and find innovative approaches that honor the company's history while positioning it for future success." The irony of his comment about not applying generic business school theories was particularly striking to Sarah, since her consulting approach had always been based on exactly the kind of customized, relationship-focused methodology that Marcus was describing as his own innovation. But rather than feeling frustrated by his lack of awareness, Sarah found herself genuinely curious about how this revelation might unfold and whether it might lead to greater understanding and mutual respect. My dear friends, I want to pause here again because I know many of you are feeling the tension of this moment right along with Sarah. If you've ever been in a situation where someone was taking credit for your work, or if you've ever had to decide between defending yourself and taking the higher road, you know how challenging these moments can be. Sarah's grace and wisdom in this situation are inspiring me, and I hope they're inspiring you too. If this story is touching your heart, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and tell me in the comments about times when you've chosen grace over confrontation. Your stories help create this beautiful community where we can all learn from each other's experiences and find strength in knowing we're not alone in navigating these complex human moments. Dr. Williams had clearly decided that the conversation had reached a point where gentle guidance toward truth would serve everyone involved better than allowing the misunderstanding to continue indefinitely. Sarah, I'm curious about your perspective on family business consulting. You mentioned that construction and development has been a successful practice area for your firm. Have you found that family dynamics create unique opportunities or challenges in strategic planning? The question was perfectly crafted to allow Sarah to share her professional expertise while potentially creating recognition for Marcus about the specific nature of her work. Sarah appreciated her mentor's continued skill at facilitating difficult conversations and recognized this as an invitation to begin bridging the gap between Marcus's assumptions and the reality of her professional experience. Family businesses definitely present unique opportunities, Sarah began thoughtfully. The personal relationships and long-term thinking that characterize family companies can be incredible assets for sustainable growth, but they also require consulting approaches that honor those dynamics rather than trying to override them with purely analytical frameworks. Marcus nodded enthusiastically, apparently pleased to find common ground with someone who seemed to understand the sophisticated challenges he believed he had been navigating. That's exactly right. Generic consulting approaches just don't work with family companies. You need someone who really understands the industry and can work with the family dynamics rather than against them. I imagine your consulting experience with Thompson Construction gave you some interesting insights into those dynamics, Dr. Williams said to Sarah, her tone carefully neutral, but her intent clearly focused on creating the opening for truth that had been building throughout their conversation. Sarah felt the moment of decision arrive with crystal clarity. She could continue to let the conversation unfold naturally without revealing her specific connection to Marcus's company, or she could trust that honesty would serve everyone better than continued misunderstanding. Dr. Williams's expression encouraged her toward truth, while Jennifer's barely contained amazement suggested that the revelation was becoming inevitable regardless of how Sarah chose to handle it. Actually, Sarah said carefully, Thompson Construction has been one of my most rewarding client relationships. I've been working with David Thompson as a strategic advisor for the past 18 months, helping develop and implement the growth strategy that's led to their recent acquisitions and expansion. The words hung in the air for a moment as Marcus processed what she had said, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something approaching shock as the implications became clear. The small group around them had gone quiet, sensing that something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand all the details. "You're the consultant?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. "You're the one who's been working with Uncle David on our strategic planning?" "I am," Sarah replied simply, her tone remaining calm and professional, despite the emotional complexity of the moment. "Your uncle has been an incredible collaborator, and I've been consistently impressed by the company's commitment to maintaining its values while embracing strategic growth opportunities." The revelation seemed to hit Marcus in waves as he began to understand not only that Sarah was the consultant whose work he had been dismissing as merely useful background analysis, but also that his earlier comments about her career trajectory and professional competence had been made while she possessed intimate knowledge of his company's strategic operations and his own role within them. Dr. Williams watched the interaction with the kind of professional fascination that complex human dynamics always inspired in her, while Jennifer struggled to maintain her composure in the face of what had to be one of the most ironic reunion encounters in the history of college alumni gatherings. Other members of their former class who had been listening to the conversation began to understand that something significant was happening, even if they didn't grasp all the details. "I had no idea," Marcus said finally, his earlier confidence and condescension replaced by what appeared to be genuine embarrassment and confusion. "Uncle David never mentioned that our consultant was someone from Northwestern, or that you were someone I knew from college." "There was no reason he would have mentioned it," Sarah replied graciously. "My work with Thompson Construction has always been focused on the strategic challenges and opportunities facing the company, not on personal connections or background relationships." The gracious response seemed to make Marcus's embarrassment even more acute as he began to process not only the professional implications of his mistaken assumptions, but also the personal character that Sarah was demonstrating in her response to his earlier dismissiveness. The woman he had assumed was probably working in nonprofit or education had not only built a successful consulting firm, but had been directly responsible for strategic guidance that had contributed to his own professional success. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "My comments earlier about your career choices were completely inappropriate and obviously completely wrong. I made assumptions based on, I don't even know what I based them on. Prejudice, I guess." "We all make assumptions sometimes," Sarah replied, her tone suggesting forgiveness rather than judgment. "What matters is how we respond when we realize our assumptions were incorrect." Dr. Williams smiled with the kind of satisfaction that came from watching former students demonstrate the ethical leadership and character development that had always been the true goals of education beyond simple knowledge acquisition. The conversation had become a real-time demonstration of grace under pressure, professional competence, and the kind of mature conflict resolution that could transform misunderstanding into mutual respect. "Sarah, I think Marcus would benefit from hearing more about your approach to family business consulting," Dr. Williams suggested. "And Marcus, I suspect you might have valuable insights about the implementation challenges from the client perspective that could inform Sarah's future consulting work. The suggestion from Dr. Williams created space for the conversation to move beyond the initial shock of revelation toward genuine professional dialogue and mutual learning. Sarah recognized her mentor's wisdom in reframing the situation as an opportunity for collaboration rather than dwelling on the misunderstanding and embarrassment that had characterized the earlier part of their interaction. "I'd be very interested in your perspective on the implementation process," Sarah said to Marcus, her tone conveying genuine professional curiosity. "Client feedback about what works well and what could be improved is invaluable for refining consulting approaches and ensuring that strategic recommendations translate effectively into operational changes." Marcus seemed grateful for the opportunity to contribute something valuable to the conversation, rather than simply apologizing for his earlier assumptions and comments. "The communication strategy you developed has been really effective at helping our field teams understand how the expansion plans connect to our core values and long-term vision. I think that's been key to maintaining employee engagement during a period of significant organizational change." Sarah felt genuine pleasure at hearing that one of her strategic recommendations was working well in practice, and she appreciated Marcus's ability to move beyond his embarrassment towards substantive professional discussion. The communication framework they were discussing had been developed through careful analysis of Thompson Construction's company culture and extensive interviews with employees at all levels of the organization to understand how information flowed through formal and informal networks. "Employee engagement during growth periods is always such a critical factor," Sarah agreed. "Companies that maintain strong internal communication and help their teams understand the strategic rationale behind changes tend to navigate expansion much more successfully than those that simply announce changes without context or explanation." Jennifer had been watching this transformation with fascination, clearly amazed by Sarah's ability to turn a potentially confrontational situation into an opportunity for professional dialogue and mutual respect. Dr. Williams nodded approvingly as she observed her former students demonstrating exactly the kind of ethical leadership and collaborative problem-solving that she had always hoped her teaching would inspire in their professional lives. "Marcus, I think you might be interested to know that Sarah's consulting approach is actually quite famous in academic circles," Dr. Williams added. "She's been invited to speak at several business schools about sustainable growth strategies for family businesses, and her case studies are being used in graduate programs to teach collaborative consulting methodology." The additional context seemed to help Marcus fully understand the scope of his misperceptions about Sarah's professional status and reputation. Rather than being someone who had somehow settled for alternative career paths, she had actually achieved significant recognition and success in her chosen field, building expertise that was valued by both practitioners and academics. "I'd love to learn more about your academic collaborations," Marcus said to Sarah. "One of the things I've been thinking about is whether there might be opportunities for Thompson Construction to partner with business schools on research projects or case study development that could contribute to academic understanding while also providing strategic insights for our continued growth." Sarah was impressed by the thoughtfulness of his suggestion and the way he was beginning to think about business strategy in terms of mutual benefit and collaborative learning rather than simply competitive advantage. "That's actually a fascinating idea," she replied. "Academic partnerships can provide valuable research opportunities while giving companies access to cutting-edge thinking and fresh perspectives from students and faculty who might approach familiar challenges from completely different angles." The conversation had transformed completely from Marcus's initial dismissive comments about Sarah's career choices to a substantive professional discussion about strategic collaboration and mutual learning. Other reunion attendees who had been listening began to join the conversation, asking questions about consulting methodology, family business challenges, and the ways that academic research could inform practical business strategy. Dr. Williams watched with evident satisfaction as the interaction she had facilitated evolved into exactly the kind of meaningful professional dialogue that she had always hoped her students would engage in throughout their careers. The situation had become a real-time demonstration of how misunderstandings could be transformed into opportunities for growth and collaboration when people approached conflict with openness and genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness or ego protection. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "this conversation is making me realize how much I've been missing by not staying more connected with classmates who chose different professional paths. I think I've been so focused on climbing the ladder within my industry that I've lost touch with the broader perspectives and innovative thinking that comes from diverse career experiences." Sarah appreciated his honesty and self-reflection, recognizing that it took genuine character to acknowledge personal limitations and blind spots in such a public setting. "I think we all tend to get focused on our own professional worlds," she replied. "That's part of what makes reunions valuable. They remind us that there are many different ways to create meaningful careers and contribute to our communities." Jennifer had been listening to the entire conversation with amazement, and she finally spoke up with a laugh that carried both amusement and admiration. "This has to be the most educational reunion conversation I've ever witnessed. You two have just demonstrated more professional growth and mutual learning in 20 minutes than most people achieve in years of networking events." The comment drew laughter from the group that had gathered around them, and Sarah realized that what had begun as a potentially embarrassing confrontation had evolved into exactly the kind of meaningful connection and professional dialogue that made reunions worthwhile. The evening had become a reminder that authentic success came in many forms, and that the most valuable professional relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for diverse contributions rather than competition and status comparison. As the evening wound down, Marcus approached Sarah privately to thank her for her grace in handling his earlier comments and to express genuine interest in learning more about her consulting approach. "I'd love to continue this conversation sometime," he said. "I think I could learn a lot from your perspective on collaborative strategy development, and I hope we might find opportunities to work together more directly in the future." Sarah accepted his business card and offered her own, recognizing that what had begun as an uncomfortable moment of misunderstanding had created the foundation for a potentially valuable professional relationship. "I'd enjoy that," she replied. "Your insights about implementation challenges from the client perspective would be invaluable for improving my consulting methodology." Dr. Williams joined them as they were exchanging contact information, her expression conveying pride in both former students for their professional maturity and ability to transform conflict into opportunity. "This has been a wonderful example of the kind of ethical leadership and collaborative problem-solving that I always hoped my students would demonstrate in their careers," she said. "You've both shown that success isn't just about individual achievement, but about how we treat others and how we respond when we make mistakes or encounter unexpected challenges." As Sarah drove home from the reunion, she reflected on the evening's events with a mixture of amusement and gratitude. The confrontation with Marcus had initially felt uncomfortable and potentially embarrassing, but it had ultimately reinforced her confidence in the choices she had made and the values that guided her work. The recognition from her former professor and the respect she had earned from classmates who initially might have questioned her career path felt more meaningful than any corporate title or salary increase could have provided. The next morning, Sarah received an email from David Thompson, asking if she would be interested in expanding her consulting relationship with Thompson Construction to include mentoring and leadership development for family members who were being prepared for greater responsibilities within the company. The timing felt like more than coincidence, and Sarah smiled as she realized that her reunion conversation with Marcus had likely contributed to this new opportunity for professional growth and collaboration. As she drafted her response to David's email, Sarah felt grateful for the reminder that authentic success was indeed measured not by others' recognition or approval, but by the impact she could have through her work and the relationships she could build through treating others with respect and integrity. The reunion had become an unexpected affirmation that staying true to her values while building a business focused on helping others succeed was not only personally fulfilling, but professionally sustainable and recognized by those who mattered most. The story of Sarah's reunion encounter began circulating among their classmates through social media and email updates, becoming a powerful example of grace under pressure and the unexpected ways that professional paths could intersect and create opportunities for mutual learning and collaboration. Several classmates reached out to Sarah in the weeks following the reunion, expressing admiration for her professional accomplishments and requesting advice about their own career transitions and business challenges. Dr. Williams invited Sarah to return to Northwestern as a guest lecturer, sharing her story with current students as an example of how ethical leadership and authentic values could guide successful entrepreneurship and consulting careers. The presentation became one of the most popular guest lectures in the business school's curriculum, inspiring students to think more broadly about professional success and the many different ways that business expertise could create positive impact in communities and organizations. Marcus had indeed learned valuable lessons from their reunion encounter, and he began approaching his role at Thompson Construction with greater humility and appreciation for collaborative strategy development. His working relationship with Sarah evolved into genuine mutual respect and professional partnership, demonstrating that even significant misunderstandings could become foundations for meaningful connections when people approach them with openness and authentic commitment to growth. The reunion story became a reminder for everyone involved that success takes many forms, that assumptions about others' choices and circumstances are often incorrect, and that the most valuable professional relationships are built on respect for diverse contributions rather than competition for status or recognition. Sarah's experience reinforced her belief that authentic living and ethical business practices were not just personally fulfilling, but professionally sustainable and ultimately more rewarding than any achievement measured solely by conventional standards of success and material accumulation.